Okay, welcome back. Um, I've been noticing a couple of things about Le Comte de Saint Germain. The whole purpose of this is to determine how much of his legend can be established in facts or reliable evidence. And one thing I notice as we go back in time to his own time, to the 18th century, people are somewhat divided as to who or what he is, with some people saying he was almost supernaturally gifted, perhaps divinely gifted, whatever that means. I very much dislike the word divine. I very much dislike the word mystical because to me they're basically meaningless categories, as far as I can tell, really. Um, and that it isn't until the late 19th century, early 20th century, that the mystical figure of Saint Germain is sort of revived and kind of used as a quasi-religious figure among certain, I don't know what you would call them, proto-Freemasonic cults. Um, Manly P. Hall is certainly an exponent of this. Madame Blavatsky, Annie Besant, this crowd that I think sought to develop a kind of alternative religion or an alternative to religions where people um, could seek a kind of heightened reality, mystical. Again, that they use these words, not me. And there you have coming out of that, you you get these stories like Saint Germain was claimed to have been uh, an advisor to Jesus Christ, and speculation as to how reliable or truthful this is. Well, I just found something in Wikipedia, and we have to even be skeptical of Wikipedia, but this little footnote, I have no reason to doubt it, and I think it's rather funny. But around the time that Saint-Germain was, I would say, politically active or known in the Paris salons of his time, there was a British, I guess it would be stand-up comedian, a mime and English comedian known as Milord Gower, who in Paris salons was somewhat famous for doing impressions of Saint-Germain. And so that should tell you something. It tells you that Saint-Germain was famous enough among the general population in Paris, or maybe among the bourgeois, or whoever might have attended those salons and appreciated the humor, or they would recognize the public figure of Saint-Germain in the comic sketches of this British comedian. Uh, so that tells you something. But apparently the comedian was the one. His stories, Milord Gower, were more extreme than the real counts. So whereas people kind of, I guess it was common, people talked about, oh my goodness, did you hear what Saint-Germain is claiming that he's 300 years old and that he was at this historical event and that historical event. So this comedian simply exaggerated and made up the story that Le Comte de Saint Germain had advised Jesus. So it wasn't something that the Count had claimed, and it certainly has no place in, I think, any serious person's assessment of the Count's real history. I mean, my goodness, this belongs certainly in the realm of comedy, or alternately in the realm of certain mystics of the late 19th century. So anyway, inevitably, hearsay of his routine, of this comedian's routine, hearsay of it. So it was inevitable that the story made up by this comedian was spread around, and some people took it for truth, and they took it for something that Saint-Germain himself had claimed. I also told you that we talked a few videos ago about Casanova, Giacomo Casanova, a similar sort of figure from the same time, and they both found themselves at Versailles around the same time. So, and that he had written, Casanova had written toward the end of his life, a very famous memoirs of his life. And I tried to download the book, and for some reason it just wouldn't download. So I'm relying on this pretty good passage in Wikipedia from Casanova's memoirs, and he in this passage describes Saint-Germain. So I think it's quite entertaining, describing a dinner he had. Giacomo Casanova describes in his memoirs several meetings with the celebrated and learned impostor, an impostor, a fraud, a crank, which I think is a little harsh. Or it's not even exactly true, because Casanova expresses, I think, sincere appreciation and even amazement at the person of Saint-Germain. So he's writing here of his first meeting with Saint-Germain in 1757. So he writes, and now I'm quoting, he says, "The most enjoyable dinner I had was with Madame de Robert Gergy, who came with the famous adventurer known by the name of the Comte de St. This individual, instead of eating, talked from the beginning of the meal to the end, and I followed his example in one respect, as I did not eat, but listened to him with the greatest attention. It may be safely said that as a conversationalist, he was unequaled. Saint-Germain gave himself out for a marvel and always aimed at exciting amazement, which he often succeeded in doing. So Saint-Germain liked to impress people. He invested a lot. Now this is just me talking. It was important for him to put himself forth at public events as being someone to inspire astonishment among other guests. He was a scholar, linguist, musician, and chemist, good-looking, and a perfect ladies' man. For a while he gave them paints and cosmetics. He flattered them, not that he would make them young again, which he modestly confessed was beyond him, but that their beauty would be preserved by means of a wash, which, he said, cost him a lot of money, but which he gave away freely. He had contrived to gain the favor of Madame du Pompadour, who had spoken about him to the king, for whom he had made a laboratory in which the monarch, a martyr to boredom, tried to find a little pleasure or distraction, at all events by making dyes. That's D-Y-E-S, to dye fabrics. The king had given him a suite of rooms at Chambord and 100,000 francs for the construction of a laboratory. And according to Saint-Germain, the dyes discovered by the king would have a materially beneficial influence on the quality of French fabrics. So I guess he encouraged Louis XV to dabble in chemistry to produce these dyes, which he said would revive the French fabric industry. That's what I'm interpreting from this. This extraordinary man, intended by nature to be the king of impostors and quacks, would say in an easy, assured manner that he was 300 years old, that he knew the secret of the universal medicine, that he possessed a mastery over nature, that he could melt diamonds, professing himself capable of forming out of 10 or 12 small diamonds one large one of the finest water without any loss of weight. All this, he said, was a mere trifle to him. It was very easy for him to do. Notwithstanding his boastings, his barefaced lies, and his manifold eccentricities, I cannot say I thought him offensive. In spite of my knowledge of what he was, and in spite of my own feelings, I thought him an astonishing man, as he was always astonishing me. All right, so that's a nice little, I think before we dive into the Most Holy Trinosophia, that we get a little historical perspective plus the eyewitness account of the Count from Casanova, from his memoirs. And now, as you see, we're into the Most Holy Trinosophia. It's not very long, and I have to say I'm going into it with some misgivings, because there is some doubt, and I think considerable doubt, that Saint-Germain wrote this manuscript. At times, other historians, other sources, other than Manly P. Hall, have ascribed this work to Cagliostro, which to me makes a little more sense, because it does start in a dungeon. It does the first person, the I, the character designated by I, first person. It's kind of a first person spiritual, alchemical, allegorical journey, and it begins in a dungeon. And I doubt that Saint-Germain was ever near a dungeon. He could be just using his imagination and using the metaphor of a dungeon to just talk about human nature or the human condition, in my view, perhaps being trapped in our conditioning that we must break out of in order to achieve something sublime. On the other hand, Cagliostro was captured or was arrested in Rome, and he had this manuscript on him. And the only evidence we have that it was written by Saint-Germain was this little scrap of paper that was pasted in the first edition in a bookstore in Paris, I think, in which the owner of the bookstore wrote that it was Saint-Germain, but we can't be sure, and it's a little unnerving how Manly P. Hall just, doesn't express any doubts about this and just seems to be very focused on building up a kind of myth around this historical person. Nonetheless, it will introduce us to the practice of alchemy and conjure for us as we give ourselves over to the imagery, the symbols, the method of induction. How does the writer, whether it is Saint-Germain or Cagliostro, how do they pull the reader into an alchemical point of view or an inner psychological state of alchemy through the imagery in the work? And I think that's interesting. And ultimately, I'm hoping that this video series, more than anything, just helps people go to sleep at night. So let's just roll with it here. Now that I've used up most of the time. So Let's get into it for like 10 minutes. The Most Holy Trinosophia, Section 1. It is in the retreat of criminals, in the dungeons of the Inquisition, that your friend writes these lines which are to serve for your instruction. At the thought of the inestimable advantages which this document of friendship will procure for you, the horrors of a long and little-deserved captivity seem to be mitigated. It gives me pleasure to think that while surrounded by guards and encumbered by chains, a slave may still be able to raise his friend above the mighty, the monarchs who rule this place of exile. My dear Philocatus, you who are about to penetrate into the sanctuary of the sublime sciences, my hand is about to raise for you the impenetrable veil which hides from the eyes of common men, the tabernacle, the sanctuary, wherein the Eternal has lodged the secrets of nature, kept for a few that are privileged, the few elect whom his omnipotence created that they may see, and seeing may soar after him in the vast expanse of his glory and deflect upon mankind one of the rays that shine round his golden throne. If your friend's example proves a salutary lesson for you, I shall bless the long years of tribulation which the wicked have made me suffer. 2 stumbling blocks, equally dangerous, will constantly present themselves to you. One of them would outrage the sacred rights of every individual. It is misuse of power which God will have entrusted to you. The other, which would bring ruin upon you, is indiscretion. Both are born of the same mother. Both owe their existence to pride. Human frailty nourishes them. They are blind. Their mother leads them. With her aid, these 2 monsters carry their foul breath even into the hearts of the Lord's elect. Woe unto him who misuses the gifts of heaven in order to serve his passions. The almighty hand that made the elements subject to him would break him like a fragile reed. An eternity of torments could hardly expiate his crime. The infernal spirits would smile with contempt at the tears of the one whose menacing voice had so often made them tremble in the bosom of their fiery depths. It is not for you, Philocatus, that I sketch this dreadful picture. The friend of humanity will never become its persecutor. The precipice, my son, which I fear for you, is indiscretion. The imperious craving to inspire astonishment and admiration. God leaves to men the task of punishing the imprudent minister who permits the eye of the profane to look into the mysterious sanctuary. O Philocatus, may my sorrows be ever present in your mind. I, too, have known happiness, was showered with the blessings of heaven, and surrounded by powers such as the human mind cannot conceive. Commanding the genii that guide the world, happy in the happiness that I created, I enjoyed within the bosom of an adored family the felicity which the Eternal accords to his beloved children. One moment destroyed everything. I spoke, and it all vanished like a cloud. O my son, follow not in my steps. Let no vain desire to shine before men bring you too to disaster. Think of me, your friend, writing to you from this dungeon, my body broken by torture. Remember, Philoctetus, that the hand which traces these characters bears the marks of the chains which weigh it down. God has punished me. But what have I done to the cruel men that persecute me? What right have they to interrogate the minister of the Eternal? They ask me, what are the proofs of my mission? My witnesses are prodigies, and my virtues are my defenders. A clean life, a pure heart. But what am I saying? Have I still the right to complain? I spoke, and the Lord delivered me, deprived of strength and power, to the furies of greedy fanaticism. The arm which once could overthrow an army can today hardly lift the chains that weigh it down. I wonder. I should give thanks to eternal justice. The avenging God has pardoned his repentant child. An aerial spirit has entered through the walls which separate me from the world. He's shown himself to me, resplendent with light, and has determined the duration of my captivity. Within 2 years, my sufferings will end. My torturers, upon entering my cell, will find it empty, and soon purified by the 4 elements. Pure as the genius of fire, I shall resume the glorious station to which divine goodness has raised me. But how distant as yet is this time? How long 2 years seem to one who spends them in suffering and humiliation. Not content with making me undergo the most horrible agony, my oppressors, to torture me further, have devised still surer and more revolting means. They have brought infamy on my head, have made my name a thing of disgrace. The children of men recoil in terror when by chance they approach the walls of my prison. They fear lest some deadly vapor escape through the narrow slit that reluctantly admits a ray of light to my cell. That, O Philoctetus, is the cruelest of all blows that they could bear down upon me. I know not whether I shall be able to get this document into your hands. I judge the difficulty I shall have in contriving for it a way out of this place of torture by those I have had in order to write it. Deprived of all help, I myself have composed the agents I needed. The flame of my lamp, some coins, and a few chemical substances overlooked by the scrutinizing eyes of my tormentors have yielded the colors which adorn this fruit of a prisoner's leisure. Profit by the instructions of your unhappy friend. They're so clear that danger exists for them to fall into hands other than yours. Remember only that all of it is to serve you. An obscure line, an omitted character would prevent your lifting the veil which the hand of the Creator has placed over the Sphinx. Adieu, Philoctetus, do not mourn me. The clemency of the Eternal equals his justice. At the first mysterious assembly, you will see your friend again. I salute you in the name of God. Soon I shall give the kiss of peace to my brother.